Now, a follower of the Bahá'í faith who is being held by the Iranian regime has published a vivid and shocking memoir of her time in prison. Mahvash Sabet is an award-winning educator and poet. She's been in and out of detention since 2010, suffering solitary confinement and psychological torture. Baha'is, Iran's largest non-Muslim religious minority, are regarded as a threat to the state. Alongside the harshness in jail, Mahvash writes about resilience and friendship. One of those she shared a prison ward with for almost a year is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who was, of course, herself imprisoned and held hostage by the Iranian state for 6 years. I spoke to Nazanin earlier alongside Bahiya Nakhchivani, who translated Mahvash's memoir, Open Wide the Doors, into English. Nazanin began by telling me of her memories of Mahvash in prison.
Mahvash in particular, she was very much into poetry, literature, and she was basically the softest soul in the ward because she had this amazing silver long hair and she would just sit in one corner, read poetry, and everyone had so much respect for her. And there was one very kind of prominent thing about Mahvash was everyone behaved themselves in her presence because she was basically like a mother for everybody, but also she was so respectful and she had served such a long time in Evin prison.
What was your relationship with her like? And I believe she actually wrote a poem for your daughter, is that correct?
She did, yes. I remember very, very vividly, it was about maybe like a couple of months that I had been transferred to the general ward. So it would have been about 1 year from my arrest. And one day she told me, Nazanin, one day you look back and you think about prison and you think about yourself, thinking how strong you were, that you have actually gone through it. I think probably at that time I was in denial, but I was thinking that this is from someone who has endured so much, but this is just her and her experience. And it was indeed years after, when I was released, when I thought about what she told me, and she was right, because I often tell people that you don't know how strong you are until you are put to test. And she knew it.
Bahiya, if I could talk to you a bit about your relationship with Mahvash, how was she able to get her extraordinary memoir out? And how did you come to be the translator for it?
I started to know her, in a way, through her poetry around 2011, when the first few poems came from Iran, through friends and friends of friends, and through the bravery of other people in her cell. And then from there on, dribbles of poems kept coming out. And so I began to build a picture of this extraordinary woman who had this combination of fearless courage and immense compassion. What struck me most was her honesty. When she was miserable, she expressed it, at least in the poems. She knew who she was.
In the memoir, Bahiya, she talks extensively about her faith and how she managed to keep adhering to its principles through the worst of times. She also talks about how she put the Baha'i principle of constructive resilience into practice. What does that mean? How can you help us understand that?
When you are in a regime where your faith is itself considered a heresy and apostasy, to even answer a question about it is considered spreading corruption on earth. And your actions then become considered criminal by the regime. So what the Baha'is have discovered, really a tool that they've developed in conditions of such extreme hardship and repression, what the Baha'is developed was, as you described it, a constructive form of resilience. The difference being it's not resistance, it doesn't have that oppositional element to it. It's constructive because it's based on the idea of community building, of looking for ways to alleviate suffering in concrete acts. And I think Nazanin herself has probably had the experience of knowing what that's like in the prison. The Baha'is develop programs, projects, to help in a totally ad hoc and personal way through friends to help these people.
Nazanin, how did you witness that with Mahvash?
They kind of allowed everybody who wanted to join them when they were praying or sitting together and talking about their faith, but they didn't encourage anyone to do that either.
Do you have a faith, Nazanin? Did you pray in Evin prison?
I did. I went through phases of my belief throughout the journey of my prison, and at the moment I have kind of parked the idea of religion. But I did, frankly, that was actually what saved me. But I was in solitary confinement in particular.
You think it saved you? You would describe yourself as Muslim?
I do. I believe in, obviously, God. I think the route to God is what I am currently thinking about at the moment. But of course, I believe in God. I believe in humanity and in good things and in faith and in kindness and love more than the route that takes us to God. When I talk about I've parked the idea of religion at the moment, one thing that I was going to mention about Mahvash was the day that she was going to be released in 2007. Of course, Bahá'ís, they had to absolutely complete their term in prison. So there was no way any Bahá'í would be released early. So they knew exactly when their release date was. I remember very well that Mahvash woke up. She had already given all her stuff away. She had like one leather bag that she was taking out with her. And I remember she was waiting patiently for the whole entire day, bearing in mind that the release letters come right in the morning, like first thing in the morning, so that then that is your freedom day. I think they were trying to punish her as much as they possibly could on the last day. Her letter did not come until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was just shocking to see that Mahvash was very calm. She was so calm. She was like, you know what? Even if it doesn't come today, it will come tomorrow. She did not mind. If there was anybody else, they would have been like, hang on, I have spent 10 years in prison. She very, very kind of patiently and graciously kind of went through the last day of her imprisonment. The letter came last minute of the working hour, and then she was released. And it was only like a couple of years later, when I had been released and I had come back to London, that she was rearrested.
I was about to ask Bahá'í about that rearrest, the trauma of the rearrest that Nazanin just described there. How is Mahvash now, and what prospects are there for freedom for her?
She is technically a prisoner, of course, but because she had an extremely severe health condition with heart operation and so forth about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, she's on a medical furlough, which means she has to be ready to be summoned at any moment to come to Evin to be examined, assessed, given evaluation by several, what she calls the gentlemen. One of the things I wanted to add about her is that in spite of the terrible conditions and the kind of punishment, the torture that Nazanin described so well, that psychological torture, that all the prisoners, not just the Bahá'ís, Mahvash has the most incredible sense of humor and irony. And so she really copes with these things. But she is, every single day she spends out of prison at the moment on this medical furlough, is of course being added to her sentence. But she is technically out and lives under a sort of Damocles sword at the moment, expecting at any moment with a packed bag at the door to be summoned back.
It's hard to imagine the psychological pressure that must bring to bear. It must feel something that is very familiar to you, Nazanin. I just wonder, in conclusion, if you were able to get a message for Mahvash, if you'd like to send one to her, what would you say to her?
If there was one thing that Mahvash, as we all called her, taught us, was to be patient, and the right time will come. And I think she encouraged all of us to have respect for each other and to have love. I always talk about how the quality of the time that you spent in prison, it can vary. But the time that I spent with Mahvash was probably one of the best and the highest quality of times.
Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Bahá'í Naghchavani speaking to me earlier.